Hello everyone and welcome back to day 3 of our Eastern States series. In the last episode, we take a visit to Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky for the very first time. Seeing what the world's longest cave system looks like was incredible, so I'd highly recommend you go back and watch that video first. Today, we fast forward around 2 weeks to mid-November where we'd be going to quite a few national park sites I hadn't experienced before. With it now being November, there are 2 big changes to the trip. First, now that my brother had left, my parents and aunt were joining me. 2, and this one is pretty unfortunate, most of the fall color on the trees had disappeared by then. There were still patches of yellow here and there, but for the most part, there weren't a whole lot of leaves at all. I wasn't too bummed about it since I already got to see peak color in the Midwest, but I did feel bad for my parents since it was a pretty amazing sight to behold. That said, a lack of fall colors aren't going to stop the fun, and we still very much enjoyed the parks. Speaking of parks, you're probably wondering where we even went in this video. Well, originally I was going to make a designated video for Great Falls Park in Maryland and Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. However, I decided to just combine the two since I didn't have enough footage to necessitate a full video for Great Falls. Part of the reason is we weren't able to hike the park's most popular and best trail, the Billy Goat Trail. From what I understand, there's a hiking trail for sections A, B, and C of the Billy Goat Trail, and some of them were actually closed. It sounds like a lot of fun to do the rock scrambling there, so I definitely say you should do it when you visit the park. Our visit was a simple hour-long excursion just to see Great Falls itself. I was surprised to see that there were still plenty of colorful trees along the scenic drive into the park. But where there still was a fair bit in Maryland, there weren't in states like Virginia and West Virginia at this time. Upon reaching the ticket window, I was impressed that this was a national park site. I actually didn't know that before visiting. Great Falls Park is actually part of the Greater Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historic Park. It's true, there's a lot of history here, so perhaps I would have made a full video on the park if I were more knowledgeable about it. The park you stand in exists because people cared. The National Park Service was America's best idea, and no one can convince me otherwise. From the parking lot, the trail to Great Falls is short and scenic. You walk across a couple very nice bridges before reaching the main viewpoint from Olmsted Island. Great Falls drops the Potomac River 47 feet with a width of 350 feet. It's a really nice waterfall for what it's worth, and I always enjoy seeing it. Keep in mind, this wasn't my first time here. I just wanted to make a repeat visit since I had never documented it on my YouTube channel and because it had been a number of years since my last visit. Hopefully I can head back again at some point, hike the Billy Goat Trail, and make a full video for this cute little park. Anyways, on to the big boss of the video, Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. It was my first time visiting this park, famous for its many views of the Appalachian Mountains via the 105-mile Skyline Drive. While this is where we'd be spending the majority of our day at, we actually started right outside park boundaries at a privately owned business called Luray Caverns. This cave system travels beneath some of Shenandoah National Park. Unlike other caves I've experienced in the United States, Luray Caverns feels a bit more developed with its paved walkways, making the cave accessible even to those in wheelchairs. Now, as much as that does allow more people to see the caverns, I'm not a super big fan of it since it does make the cave feel a little less immersive and natural. However, if you put that aside and focus on the cave formations alone, Luray Caverns is absolutely wonderful. A Smithsonian Institution report that was released in 1880, just 7 years after the caverns were discovered, says that there was probably no other cave in the world more completely and profusely decorated with stalactite and stalagmite ornamentation than that of Luray. I could definitely see where they're coming from because every step of the way there are more incredibly intricate cave formations to enjoy. My favorite part of Luray Caverns by far were these incredible pools of water that reflect the stalactite formations on the ceiling. I bet you're looking at these video clips wondering where the water is, but you're looking at it right now. If you line everything up, notice how the ground and ceiling formations are exactly symmetrical. Pretty cool, right? Another super unique thing I saw here was the Great Stalagpipe Organ. This is connected to a system throughout the cave that gently taps on stalactites so that you can hear what they sound like. I didn't capture any video of what it sounds like, but it was a really cool and tranquil experience. Lastly, right before exiting the cave, you'll stumble upon the Wishing Well, which is a little pool where people toss coins and dollars inside. Luray Caverns actually encourages this because what they do is they drain the pool once a year, collect all of the money, and donate all of the proceeds to medical research educational grants. Since they opened, they've donated a staggering $1.1 million US, which is amazing. Luray Caverns was a pretty cool stop before actually entering Shenandoah's park premises. It's a really cool idea to spend a few hours there before enjoying the national park. Now, I think I was overly optimistic about fall color heading into the park since upon entering at lower elevations, there was still a little bit. But see, that's what I failed to realize, is that the higher elevations did not, and this park is all about higher elevation mountains. We entered Shenandoah National Park via the Thornton Gap entrance, and the first overlook you'll come across was also the lowest elevation overlook we'd be experiencing this visit. The tunnel parking overlook easily had the best views of fall color in the park for us. Some of the distant mountains still had large pockets of yellow, which was actually very beautiful. If that's just a sample of what this park looks like in October, then I can't wait to come back one day. The Pinnacles overlook just 5 minutes away was another great spot to see some distant fall color. So was the Stony Man Mountain overlook. In addition to the little bit of yellow here, this one actually had some reds, which was very appealing to look at. Unfortunately, it would be a while before we'd see any fall colors again after this. I mean, just from this viewpoint, if you look right, you can clearly see that most of the trees were void of any leaves at all. Every now and then you would get patches of green, which was nice, but no luck with yellow, orange, or reds. Our next stop along Skyline Drive would be the 1.4-mile out and back trail to Dark Hollow Falls. Shenandoah National Park is littered with waterfalls, but of them all, this is by far the easiest one to access. The short hike was definitely pretty easy overall, but because you lose elevation heading out, you do have 584 feet of elevation gain heading back up to the trailhead. You'll follow a little stream most of the way there, and then the latter half of the hike is also lined with lush ferns. In no time you'll reach the 70-foot tall waterfall that looks a fair bit taller in person than it does in the videos I captured. Dark Hollow Falls can be characterized by its two side-by-side drops, first at the top layer and then at the bottom layer. It was clear to me that this wasn't flowing anywhere close to its peak, but it was still a very pleasant waterfall and a very pleasant trail. We then made a quick stop at the visitor center to learn a bit about the park's history and eat lunch at the parking benches right outside. Get it? Because his name's Hugh? You were supposed to laugh at that. Anyways, near the visitor center, not far from the road, we actually had some wildlife spottings. We saw a few deer with antlers. These looked quite a bit larger than the average deer, I'd say. It was a really wonderful viewing moment for sure. Our next pull off was at the Hazeltop Ridge overlook, which didn't have any fall color but was still very nice. We enjoyed a rather similar view from the summit of our next hike, which was the Bear Fence Mountain Trail. This is a 1-mile loop that can also be an out and back trail depending on how you navigate it. The way all trails takes you there is a more strenuous route where you have to scramble in between some rocks. What we did instead, and what I'd recommend you do if you want an easier path, is to follow the Appalachian Trail to the summit. Yes, that's right, the 2,180 plus mile Appalachian Trail cuts straight through Shenandoah National Park, and you'll probably cross paths with it, no pun intended, on several of the park's shorter hikes. The view from the top of Bear Fence Mountain wasn't one of my favorites in the park, but was still worth the journey to reach it for sure. My favorite view in all of Shenandoah National Park can be found at Black Rock Summit, which requires a 1.1-mile loop to complete. Black Rock Summit is compiled of a bunch of exposed black rocks that form the seabed of an ancient body of water that predates the Appalachian Mountains. The geological forces that created the mountains changed the seabed into solid quartzite rock. Eventually, the rocks will have settled enough that plants can grow on it, and Black Rock Summit will simply look like the other forested mountains in the Appalachian Range. If you climb to the top of Black Rock Summit, there's a stunning panoramic view that was personally my favorite that we experienced in the park. I've heard it's one of the best spots to visit during peak fall color, but even as is, it was wonderful.
Let's tell the viewers the game plan.
Currently, it's 4:32 p.m. and we want to make it to one of the lower elevation overlooks by 4:51. Why? Because that's when sunset happens and I like sunsets. The one we experienced here in Shenandoah National Park was one of the more memorable sunsets I've had in a while. We had Rip Rap Overlook all to ourselves and I couldn't have asked for a better spot. There was plenty of greenery in the forefront and a perfect backdrop of the sun setting on the Appalachian Mountains in the backdrop. You know that period of time after the sun sets where there's still like 20 minutes of light, enough to see maybe one last overlook? Well, we took our chance and booked it over to Mormon's River Overlook while we could. Contrary to sunsets, my footage will never be able to capture the moon all too well, but it was shining very, very bright here. It was a great compliment to the final view outlooking the Sugar Hollow Reservoir. If the sunset overlook to end out the day wasn't enough, this was certainly great as well. Anyways, let's talk about my final thoughts on Shenandoah National Park. While we did not get to see a whole lot of fall color here, let alone many tree leaves at all, I still had a very fun time here. I'd like to imagine that what I saw today was just an appetizer for a future visit. I'm sure if you go at the right time of year, it's drop dead gorgeous here. As is, I really like like the sprawling mountain views and trails. Dark Hollow Falls was great too, though there's so many other waterfalls in the park and many of them could be considerably better, so it's definitely on my radar to see these the next time I come here. I can already see the potential for how great of a park this would be and why so many people would love it so much. Stay tuned for the next one, where we'll be visiting America's youngest national park, New River Gorge in West Virginia. Bye guys.